Ginsberg and City Lights books. You can see Ginsberg's landmark book, Howl, is in the collection, and Lawrence Ferlinghetti's Her, which is one long, non-grammatical Proustian small letter, no paragraphs, kind of a quest book. And so we can look later at some of the individual memorabilia. These are by Lawrence Ferlinghetti, actually. Her dad knew Ferlinghetti, who founded City Lights, publishing City Lights bookstore in San Francisco. So you can see the influence of Eastern religion. People are looking to meditate, are interested in some of the wisdom of the East. And here's the book, Heartbeat, by my friend Marion Cassady, who was the wife of, later ex-wife of Neal Cassady, and it talks about her relationship with both Neal Cassady and
Clarence to death, is that right? That belonged
yes.
to her?
To her dad, yes. He collected all of this meticulously. So we shouldn't throw anything out, right? We should keep everything out. Okay, so. Allen Ginsberg's Howl and other poems were originally published by City Lights Books in the fall of 1957, at which a series of poets and professors persuaded the court that the book was not obscene. Allen Ginsberg is responsible for loosening the breath of American poetry at mid-century. Most of all, he has demonstrated that there is nothing in American social and erotic reality which cannot find a place there. His powerful mixture of Blake, Whitman, Pound, and Williams, to which he added his own volatile, grotesque, and tender humor, has assured him minimal place in modern poetry. Say what you will, he, Ginsberg, proves to us, in spite of the most basic experience that life can offer a man, the spirit of our love survives to ennoble our lives if we have the wit and the courage and the faith and the art to persist. So he ennobled his mother was in a mental hospital, so very degraded experiences that he writes about, but he's come to be immortalized as a poet, American poet, and here in this museum. So yes. Well, I think there were dollars. Everybody says that, you know. And certainly gays were included. And there was a young exhibit about the beats that focused on that aspect, but it was a very diverse community and it wasn't an exclusive community. I find this interesting. I cannot figure this out. Apparently there was a play in which Billy Dixon plays Jean Harlow in a play called The Beats, which seems to be extraordinary. The beat movement involves theater, literature. There are also in these, we'll have a chance to browse later, there are ways that you can, websites and further, lots more material about the beats. Whatever happened to Dean Moriarty? Was there really such a person, asks the myopic young writer just in from the Midwest and seeking in San Francisco some of the landmarks he first saw in a famous and rather definitive book about a certain swinging era here in the late 50s and early 40s and early 50s, a book which Jack Kerouac called On the Road. For Dean Moriarty, motor maniac hero of On the Road, Moriarty wailed in and out of San Francisco in one smoking bomb after another, bomb of a car, to finally stay and become a Southern Pacific brakeman, to draw his friends Kerouac and Ginsberg here from New York. Howl was dedicated to him. Did become a kind of landmark for a generation. For On the Road destined the Beat generation and became its Bible. Dean Moriarty most decidedly does exist. His name is Neal Cassady, and yes, he's still around, young man, although he isn't now. He died in Mexico in 1968, taking with both alcohol and something else in his system. How old? He was only probably in his 40s, although he looked much older to us. Yeah, that was the price of that time. We'll have a chance to take a closer look. Beatitude reading in San Francisco Poets, which really shows you that connection of the Beatitudes, the biblical concept of living simply, to the spirit of the Beat times. It began with poets published by Lawrence Ferlinghetti's Pocket Press and the subject of an obscenity trial. Howl and other poems sold 50,000 copies in its first year in print. More than any single work, it focused national and international attention on the North Beach haunts where writers like Ginsberg, Getty, Jack Kerouac, Gregory Corso, Kenneth Rexroth, and Gary Snyder represented what Kerouac called the San Francisco poetry renaissance. 2 years later, Kerouac's tale of cross-country wanderings on the road captured the public imagination and swept bestseller lists to become the Bible of the Beats, those who were mad to live, mad to talk, mad to be saved. Though the wild lifestyle of the Beats represented a protest against the values of the American bourgeoisie, it soon attracted the curiosity of middle-class tourists. Buses were recruited through North Beach so they could view the beatniks, as a local columnist dubbed them. Some coffee shops and bars even hired house beats to chant crude verse and insult the squares. By the early 60s, the original Beats had moved across town to the Haight, where they would help usher in a new decade and another story. Now we're coming now to this wall. If you're courageous, you can look under the curtain. This is my friend Henry Maxwell, who was a companion of this fellow Neal Cassady. And this is some photographs. You haven't gotten to the red curtain.
Okay, I'm dying to see this red curtain.
The red curtain, you can lift it.
Is it Anne-Marie in the?
I can lift it?
Yes.
Oh.
And a lot of Neal. Those who want to visit the red curtain.
Wow.
The first event is actually. But that was a sequel. Look at People didn't hold back in the day, but some writing has to be quite explicit for this sense.
She said, this is no big deal.
No big deal. What I'd like to know is who was taking the pictures?
One of their poet friends. These were sort of the preliminary, like kind of communes, and everybody's hanging out.
Kind of like John Lennon and Ogle.
Exactly. This is
Yeah.
In
the
10 minutes.
first bed, right?
Yeah.
I wondered about the word tenderness in this period.
I think so. I think that,
Pleasure I see, but
the
tenderness.
Catholics got rid of the hats in the churches.
Yeah.
You think there's some, okay.
And there are a lot of wonderful original poems by Allen Ginsberg,
Opening up.
Memorabilia.
You have pain and pleasure.
I have 4 copies, but not one.
The sign.
You zoom in.
But I'll get one back. Yeah. Let's see. She did all of these.
Brand new.
Yes.
Wait.
Yes.
Yeah.
Wait. Do it again.
Okay, but you gotta go. I'm gonna go back.
You're 10 years too young. But it was a good time. And at these sessions, maybe,
Hi, I'm Lynn, and you're.
I'm sorry.
Welcome. Welcome. Hope to see more of you. All right, so, we want to come back and
I wanted to attend some of
read.
Yes. Right.
This is interesting. The exhibit will be open until the 25th, if anyone wants to come in. Yep. Describe Neal Cassady, delicate eyes that blinked Rockies. Delicate eyes that blinked Rockies. So we're looking for some delicate eyes that blinked Rockies. He came from the Rocky Mountains, so his delicate eyes blinked Rockies. We're looking for some original imagery as you reflect right to me, the beat. Paper, okay. Does anybody have paper?
I put out paper and some cover with it out of the camera.
Who needs paper?
Was he in your thing?
The characters, these people were before me, but we saw them, you know, younger people. The younger people who were like, you know, those of us who were like, you know, 14 in the summer of love and stuff, we were influenced by these people. And they influenced us a great deal. Really? Excellent. Okay, so we're all ready to do some writing. Very, very nice. A hand for the beat poets. Let's talk about women of the beat generation. What happened to the women poets? You see a lot of men listed. This is a great book that really talks about what happened. There was Elise Cohen, and she was the look-alike girlfriend of Allen Ginsberg, also Jewish. They could be alter egos, and I think it was a complex and painful relationship for both of them. And she ended up taking her life during that period. There was Diane DePrima, who did write archetypal poet and archetypal beatnik. Diane DePrima did Diary of a Beat, but they made her make it very pornographic, which seems to be what women are required to do if we write about beat stuff. So Diary of a Beatnik, I think it's called, which was a commercialized thing. Hetty Jones, who was married to Leroy Jones, publisher of Beat Zin Yadin. Joan Burroughs, intellectual playgirl who brought the beats together. Jan Kerouac, daughter of Jack Kerouac, who almost never knew her father, went on to write Baby Driver, and also her life ended early, about the urge to travel. Jane Bowles, expatriate writer who hosted the beat invasion of Tangiers, and Carolyn Cassady, who is the artist and on the car outside of the city. So, because there only should be a guy. They didn't need two poets in the family. One poet was enough. So women had some difficulty participating at times fully in the beat generation, but they did a wonderful exhibit at San Jose State, a symposium on women now who are very active in publishing from this period. So make sure that you don't go out and write in a car in snow, women. So that's share. Anybody else who wants to share their poetry? Here is a great book, Off the Road by Carolyn Cassady, which really deals with her recent memoir of life in that period. Carolyn's probably in her early 70s now, living in London, someone whom I know. She was an aristocratic, cultured young woman who graduated top university study. And she married Neal Cassady from the Reform School, and they were a very dynamic union. They have 3 children. Were kind of active still in this. And later on, with all the ins and outs of their lives, and Neal's being so much gone and on the road and still dangling some other relationships, Jack Kerouac came to stay with them as well. And so she is immortalized by Sissy Spacek in the movie Heartbeat, having kind of more than one husband on occasion, although she scandalized the way that the movie portrays it. She said they were really very helpful in the raising of the family. So these were daring individuals. Does anyone else want to read a bit of poetry?
Well, all right.
Right now.
I thought that I have always thought of that generation as being free spirits in all ways. And so I wrote, the spirit of love flows freely when wings of birds fly gracefully in the summer air. As the rain beats down, a cradle of warmth encompasses the emancipated spirits.
Beautiful. Beautiful. And it really seems to sum up the freedom of the beat and the hippie period that followed. Thank you. Can you introduce yourself, sir? You came with Della, and how do you...
I'm Della's husband, and as I mentioned to you, I met Iris and Pearl at meetings, just occasionally. I didn't know him very well, but I was a conscious objector during World War II, so
Really?
that
And your first name is?
Aaron.
Aaron. Aaron, and you were a conscientious objector during World War II.
Right,
So
and
that's
I'm
pretty-
very active in the peace movement, trying to prevent coming war.
So this is not, all these kinds of movements haven't died, and this is still, you still feel called to participate.
Definitely.
So you have a peace symbol.
Right.
That's your, thank you, Marion, for being here with us. Clarence, did you want to read your beat poem?
The beat generation, how do we explain it? We must retreat to years gone by to explain the fifth. And afforded would be a good starting point now. The sayings, the portrait, the life, the dress down, wow. There is no true revelation to explain the word beat. We could say that generations to them was neat. Look not upon how that generation did dress. One thing is certain, it was not a generation of a mess. Examine what the portrait was really saying. Listen to the music, the sound, and the music, that, and the singing.
Anybody else with a beat poem that you want to share? Or any kind of poem that you came up with? And reintroduce yourself.
I'm Madeline Blackwood.
Now, okay.
This is what I wrote. The beat goes on to the sway of the jazz in the background. Smoke fills the room. Men and women losing their intentions, slowly losing their inhibitions. Wine quench thirsty lips, melt and throat. Wine slowly intoxicates the body and mind. A man touches a woman, hold their breasts and enjoy each other's body in it. I want to say ethereal state.
Ethereal.
The ethereal state. A man in the corner of the room starts to recite a poem. Words flow like music from a saxophone. The beat goes on.
Oh,
Anyone else who wants to try to capture a sense of that?
And the beat goes on.
Anyone else who wants to share?
well, maybe we still have, if, even those that aren't sharing today, if we could be.
Us. Mountain Girl hailed them. Ken, Neal, it's too hot to paint anymore. She stopped us at the men's arrival. Do it later. The painting project dismissed, she navigated from tall hips on long legs toward a meaty, curly, gold-haired man who slipped his arm around her waist. This must be Keezy. Norris dropped his brush on the fender. Did she say Neal too, man? He asked me. She said Neal. Blushing, panting, Norris looked toward Mountain Girl and the golden rider, Ken Hero Keezy. I followed, hidden from Mountain Girl in Norris's shadow. Norris looked past them for someone else, his eyes falling first upon a clean-cut, black-haired, sky-blue-eyed Lancelot who had come to join Keezy on his right. Norris looked at me in triumph. He was in love. Neal Cassady, he affirmed shyly. No, Mountain Girl shook her head. That's only Babs. Then a gaunt, grizzled, short 50s hair man who looked to be at least 60 years old, twitching, talking to himself, bobbed and wove out from behind Ken Keezy. I could see why it had taken him a long time to walk a few feet with Keezy. The grizzled man rocked and trembled from the shoulders like someone had held him there and was shaking him out. He trembled toward us and clamped a skeletal hand on Norris's shoulder, quipping, laughing, talking back to himself as he spoke. Who's asking? Who's asking? Har har. Gordon prodded Norris in the ribs. Norris, meet Neal, Dean Moriarty from On the Road to you. Norris, befuddled, looked from the image of the first hero, handsome, deep blue-eyed guy on Ken's right to the bottle, irritated old man who was everywhere at once. Gordon, obviously embarrassed in front of Ken, his hero, plucked Norris's butt and pushed him out of the little circle toward the real Neal, who released Norris and shook and shuddered in circles around us, making speed-free mouth noises like the bright, weird kid with a briefcase who slobbered and said beep beep to the older boys in line at my junior high school. Ooh, Norris sucked in his breath, and to his credit, switched dreams. He followed the old man who drew him, vibrating down the beach, jabbing at the air with long, bony fingers, flapping leathery elbows, followed Neal Cassady, who twisted and spun like the eternal Pied Piper. Neal Cassady, in loose jeans and worn undershirt, impelled Norris along. Nors who bared a smooth golden chest over rolled-up white navy issue pants. Nors looked like an angelic choir boy following the lead of the ferryman into the underworld, compelled along behind him in untied tennis-shoed feet into a ghostly realm. That's the movement, the metaphoric moment in which, in this story, it's given with young Nors who's heard all about the beats. He wants to follow that beat. The subtitle of the book is Follow That Beat. And instead, he's seen what's happened, that all of a sudden this man has become a caricature of himself now, being trotted out to represent the beats to the hippies. And substance abuse and extremes of drug use are coming in. Some could call it Dionysian, and some could call it very self-destructive. And so this is sort of a moment in which one generation is reaching out and trying to pick up this anti-hero message of another.
When did the hippie movement begin?
I can tell you that exactly. That is my expertise. Very few people can. I think the San Francisco Chronicle, after the anti-Vietnam marches, were probably spring of '66, summer of '66, somehow picked it up and called and coined the hippies. I don't know if it was Herb Cain, but I would say it was then the hippies were coined, and pretty quick after, the 9 months or so following, then it became commercialized. The kids in your high school who would spit on you if you were a 14 or 15-year-old interested in beats and hippies, all of the ones who were going to go to fraternities and sororities and a very, very conservative life, suddenly realized because of the media they should buy some love beads and just on the weekend go up and wear them for a couple hours and walk around Haight-Ashbury. But one of the things that I wrote at the end, to distinguish, this book is about the beat hippie axis. Before this period pours into the next period. And this afterwards, I think, really sums up the message of the book. Born in Berkeley is the memoir of a pivotal period in the mid-1960s. Although written as fiction, the facts are true. After the Beats and before the hippies were named, many neighborhoods like Tupper's Park sprang up on the San Francisco Bay Peninsula. The term beat came from the New Testament Beatitudes, which spoke of living simply. The meek shall inherit the earth. Beaten down by materialistic white American culture of the 40s and early 50s, beat outsiders wrote poetry to the beat of Negro hipsters' music. Meanwhile, mainstream World War II couples, raised in the Great Depression, bestowed advantages and attention on their post-war offspring, gave their kids a lot, patriotic ideas, and the leisure to question the 50s emphasis on conformity. Look-alike houses covered up shameful social problems. The cultural pendulum had swung too far. A small percentage of youth born in this suburban security threw off their advantages and privilege. Very like the youth of 12th century Assisi, Italy, following Saints Francis and Clare, after whom San Francisco and Santa Clara are named. The Assisi youth tossed away their parents' cloth of gold, cut their hair in this case, and took to the road, following Christ's beat message. Like these, Carolyn Ryder, born in Berkeley, was ostracized by her peers who today try to claim the Summer of Love as their own. But by 1967, the real 60s Mavericks had done their work. Their civil rights, peace, and free speech marches had broken ground for be-ins and Grateful Dead music. Now even the popular kids who had ridiculed their few long-haired classmates came to hate in Ashbury streets in San Francisco, put on love beats for an hour on the weekend. The commercialized hippie was in vogue. But it is to the small group of 60s youth that first gave up privilege and followed that beat to the heart of a new and timeless life, to whom this book is dedicated.
Okay, so the beat period and
Well, some say it's still going on. The beat goes on. Yeah, and some say the beats go on, and the period is still existing. Because as independent artists who are part of that period and continue on with their work, which could include some of you, the beat goes on. That it's being sort of revitalized. There's tremendous interest in the world now in the beats. I mean, it's a global interest. There are articles every other week in Rolling Stone about Neal Cassady. This is a big, big thing now, drawing interest in Japan and all over the world for some reason. So there must be something in this experience that we can learn from. Maybe it's not so much emphasis on the materialism, maybe it's the poetry, maybe it's the peace that Aaron participated in, maybe it's civil rights, but there is a message that's important for our community.
You're saying the spirit.
The spirit lives on. The spirit lives on. Thanks, Joe.
I lived in Palo Alto instead of all these times, but I wasn't part of it. So it's curious to now come back. It's like visiting a foreign country.
Yeah,
In a way, because you know about it, you know, it's certainly
It was there.
your attention is going on all the time, but many of us weren't part of it. It was not.
so it's a time to experience, without some of the pressures of maybe making a living and the things that are occupying you, raising a family, some of you are freeing up and following that lead in your life and at this point in life. So it can have an interesting message. I wonder if we're not going to see after, because of the world events right now, whatever we feel about them, my hunch is that we'll probably see in reaction to all of the crises and the military actions in the world, we may see another peace movement. That's my guess. But there seems to be real interest in this. And why is that?
But you'll find that it's only going to be on the West Coast at this time. And the reason is because the East Coast is being pummeled with bullets coming from all over the place, and they're afraid. And they're ready to, they don't know, and so they have a different
set. My friends in graduate school, or still living near my graduate school in Virginia, and they said that, they're very patriotic, and the ships are being packed in Norfolk, and there's a lot of emphasis on people going. But the West Coast we've always been kind of unique, because you figure that to get to California, our ancestors had to be pretty mavericks, willing to get out of sort of the village mindset, willing to be part of to take a risk, to come out here. And that's like when we hear Ginsburg talking about hobos and people who have the freedom to ride the trains and to experience America. By the time our ancestors got here, one way or another, they're mavericks. So we're a collection of mavericks. The San Francisco Bay Area is about the apex of the whole thing. So we probably will see movements and counter movements emerging in response to these issues right now.
Well, I was alive during all this time, and I remember reading Jack Kerouac's On the Road it might have been in the late 50s that I read it. I'm not sure when it came out. And I remember liking it, but it was something completely other than my life. I was living in Aussie area existence right then. I was a successful schoolman, and I was raising kids, and these things were fun to hear about, and like the hippies when they became part of it. It was all fun to hear about, but I never participated in any of it, although I think I was open to it, but I didn't go do it because I was busy doing something else.
Well, and we think of the post-war period that had lots of lessons for Americans who had fought what appeared to be, a war that more at least related in Vietnam, although there were people who objected to it. People came back, and there was the affluence and opportunity to question for the kids that came earlier, but it's always a pendulum, isn't it, that swings when anybody else points Clarence.
What was the percentage of, I would say, the ratio of age, because most of us coming out of the World War II, like 21 years old, 22, most of these people were not in the war.
We're not in the war.
They were like teenagers, weren't they?
That's a very interesting point and question. It does make us wonder. Let's take a look and see when Neal Cassady, for example, was born in California.
I know it started in the late 40s, but
Well, if he was around 50, he died in 68.
I think it was in his
it's
40s.
44.
I don't know. The Bohemians before, exactly. The Bohemians, which included D.H. Lawrence and Jack London, Charmaine London, Annie Nin, Henry Miller in the 30s, Gertrude Stein. I mean, the Bohemians have existed. This isn't a brand new thing, right? They were Steinbeck. So we'll see Steinbeck again. He's writing about the poor people, the disenfranchised people. And it's like stories that Alan can probably read it freely. One about this guy who's a drinker and he's kind of poor, and he's in Arizona, and why is a person who's more kind of affluent in business choosing to write about poorer people, people with problems? What is it about the American spirit that sometimes we lose it when we, at times of great security? So
I think they were the flower generation.
what?
Flower generation.
Flower children, which are really another name for the hippie.
Hippie generation.
Hippie came after the
Yeah,
weeds.
hippie came out.
Yeah.
So that was in like late 60s.
It was around 60, the mid-60s, the hippie, 66, 67, 68, and 69, big times for the hippies. Then the classes that followed after, it became cool. Everybody had long hair. That's what you got at Macy's, were the modified hippie things. The hippies had found their clothing like in remote thrift shops, and they were often sleeping on the street. And everybody started to buy those things at Macy's and J. Magazines, and wear things like that. But not necessarily. And unfortunately, the drug part of it, which was lower key in the beats, and really went, in my opinion, became very extreme in the 60s and very destructive, because as these sort of peace and political movements started going, then what happened was all of a sudden really dangerous things got leaked into that population. And some of the gurus that you thought were so great, the college professors, the writers, were much older than these 14 and 15-year-olds, or these people in their 30s, thinking that it was okay for everyone to do this. And they were going supposedly on inner quest for finding enlightenment, but what happened is a lot of young kids ended up terribly hurt by this, very, very hurt by this. And I think there are theories that maybe it was introduced on purpose to stop some of the real movement for change that existed at that time. So that I think the drug thing was the real downfall. And the drug culture persists today. Junior high school kids are taking drugs. They no longer remember this quest to find truth or poetry or goodness. It's just become a seedy thing. So there's a bad fallout from it, as well as some good things. And then the treatment of sexuality. We can really see the First Amendment zone. How do you feel about all that? What's your opinion of that? Something to think about. And how would that emerge in your writing? Do you feel if you're going to describe a church, you might describe every detail, if you were a Christian, of the altar, for example, and of the candle. Would you not write about a sexual experience, leave it out? Do you feel that the sexuality and spirituality are equally part of your experience? It could be included as writers. The Beats might say they could. And they were sort of pioneering in that area. But it depends on what genre you're writing and what you feel. Anyone else with a comment? Wonderful poet. Wonderful
But
poet.
he withdrew from that scene and went up in to be a fire watch in the mountains.
That's right. Withdrew to the wilderness.
Yes.
Joanna McClure, who was Michael McClure's wife at one time, probably one of the ones who wasn't using her gifts, is now using her gifts. So here's Jasmine, whose father collected all this memorabilia. She's a screen writer who's making an exhibit at this time. So the beat goes on. Any other comments or questions? Yes, Marion.
I could be wrong, but because I'm looking back at my own family, but after World War II, I noticed my folks moved into government subsidized housing, and they moved away from me, and I wondered if it wasn't the end of the extended family, because they were like what we call nuclear parents. They moved
Very
away
good.
from their
Excellent.
family.
That could have caused some of the turmoil that Carolyn Ryder experienced in a nuclear family. Her real family, the villages, with the family with the 10 children and the grandparents' generation, the physicians in Nebraska. She doesn't know any of those people. She's just with those nuclear people and their limited problems. Her grandparents had passed away that she was very close to, and her mother's disturbed from being a love child or something. And so she's got these little households that try to focus all the attention down on the children, with mothers perhaps whose needs have not been met. And all of a sudden now the social problems that we hear about in Oprah Winfrey are developing behind the scenes in the households. And again, the pivot point where people after the 60s wanted to process and air the dirty laundry and tell about everything, let it all hang out. But before that, one was to be stoic and to bear up and to not talk about these things. So there was a shift there, except there are always forerunners of every movement. There are always people who sort of way before made pioneer and break ground for a movement to come. So that you can't really categorize yourself by age. You may be a forerunner or different, not only in the movement that you're part of, but forerunning another time in another place. Exhibit with Lynn Rogers, and happy to be here and have the book Born in Berkeley included as an adjunct to the exhibit at the Los Gatos Museum. Born in Berkeley ties in directly to the beat experience in that Carolyn Ryder, a fictional character who draws heavily from my life experiences, encounters Neal Cassady, who was the prototype for Jack Kerouac's On the Road, in 1966 in Manzanillo, Mexico. From chapter 12. It was a fast dark drive over unpaved road and sand dunes. Raging through the night, Norris squeezed my thigh. He was going to meet Dean Moriarty, Kerouac's hero of On the Road. In real life, Neal Cassady, I knew what that meant to him. From the next day, meeting Mountain Girl, Ken Kesey, Mountain Girl related to President Adams, and getting to paint Kesey's bust. Mountain Girl came back to scrutinize. I saw her coming, stepped aside. Who did this? She barked about the flat behind the front, narrow passenger side window. Looks like a kid did it, she scowled. Grateful for Mountain Girl's stone memory loss, she should have remembered it was me. I crouched like a kid on the bus running board, not saying a thing. Two men emerged from behind the bus. Mountain Girl hailed them. Ken, Neal! It's too hot to paint anymore now, she stopped us at the men's arrival. Do it later. The painting project dismissed, she navigated from tall hips on long legs toward a meaty, curly, gold-haired man who slipped his arm around her waist. This must be Kesey. Norris dropped his brush on the fender. Did she say Neal too, man? He asked me. She said Neal. Blushing, panting, Norris loped toward Mountain Girl and the Golden Rider, Hero Kesey. I followed, hidden from Mountain Girl in Norris's shadow. Norris looked past them, for someone else, his eyes falling first upon a clean-cut, black-haired, sky-blue-eyed Lancelot who'd come to join Kesey on his right. Norris looked at me in triumph. He was in love. Neal Cassady, he affirmed shyly. No, Mountain Girl shook her head. That's only Babs. Then a gaunt, grizzled, short 50s hair man who looked to be at least 60 years old, twitching, talking to himself, bobbed and wove out from behind Ken Kesey. I could see why it had taken him a long time to walk the 2 feet from Kesey. The grizzled man rocked and trembled from the shoulders like someone who had held him there and was shaking him out. He trembled toward us and clamped a skeletal hand on Norris's shoulder, quipping, laughing, talking back to himself as he spoke. Who's asking? Who's asking? Hurrah! Gordon prodded Norris in the ribs. Norris, meet Neal. Dean Moriarty from On the Road to you. Norris, befuddled, looked from the image of the first hero, handsome, deep blue-eyed guy on Ken's right, to the bobbing, irritated old man who was everywhere at once. Gordon, obviously embarrassed in front of Ken, his hero, plunked Norris' butt and pushed him out of the little circle toward the real Neal, who'd released Norris and shook and shuddered in circles around us, making speed-freak noises like the bright, weird kid with the briefcase who'd slobbered and said, beep, beep, to the other boys in line at my junior high school. Ooh. Norris sucked in his breath and to his credit, switched dreams, and followed the old man who drew him, vibrating down the beach, jabbing at the air with long, bony fingers, flapping leathery elbows, followed Neal Cassady, who twisted and spun like the eternal Pied Piper. Neal Cassady in loose jeans and worn undershirt impelled Norris along. Norris, who bared his smooth golden chest over rolled-up white navy issue pants, Norris looked like an angelic choir boy, following the lead of the ferryman into the underworld, compelled along behind him in untied tennis shoes into a ghostly realm. Carolyn Ryder's encounter with the late Neal Cassady in Monsignor. Welcome to Tea, Travel, and Tapes. Bruce and Joanne's wonderful place here in Willow's Land. We're sharing today about the new book that's been recently published, Born in Berkeley, and Lynn Rogers, the author, and Catherine Derby, is going to be singing and sharing some of the spirit of time musically. Wanted to share this with you.